And zip ties, $1 from the Dollar Tree, but it makes a convincing little bonsai. In this video, I'm going to talk about how we can do bonsai on the cheap, right? And I'm going to use volunteer plants to create something that looks really old and passable as bonsai. You know what? There's sort of a misconception that doing bonsai is a very expensive hobby. Now it can be. I mean, don't get me wrong. Once you get into buying imported Japanese bonsai trees or imported Japanese pots, it can get very expensive. But bonsai can be whatever you want to make it to be as far as price range goes. Okay, so what I'm holding here is a piece of deadwood or driftwood. You can find this on the beach, you can find it in the desert. In certain places, you do need permit to collect firewood, and this would actually qualify as that. And it's as cheap as paying $10 per bundle. Okay, so yes, doing bonsai can be expensive, but you can also do it on the cheap. So in this video, I'm going to do a project. I'm going to show you what Tanuki is, and you can turn something that is essentially free or very cheap and do bonsai that may cost less than going to McDonald's. You know what those are? These are cottonwood seedlings growing in my Shishigashara, and that's a volunteer plant. They get big, so you want to pull these guys out. You definitely don't want it to overtake your actual bonsai. Okay, so let's take a look at what these leaves are. This is a volunteer plant in my yard. Some of you might know what it is. We'll just follow it down and then I can give you a better idea once we get down to this tree by the pond. This is kind of grew up on its own. I get these all the time. So it's a cottonwood, actually. Look how small the leaves are down here compared to the leaves up on top. And I'm kind of developing it to see if I can turn it into a bonsai. And it's probably feeding off of the pond, so that's why it's growing really fast. Right next to it is this huge butterfly bush. Implanted itself right next to the pond. It's giving my pond shade, and it is like 12, 15 feet wide and provides all the shade I need for the koi pond, so I don't have to use a shade cloth. It is huge. It's another volunteer plant. So the neighbor has this really big red leaf maple tree. Probably stands about 40 feet tall. I've got some volunteers of that as well. Here's a volunteer baby of one of those red leaf maples. And yeah, it's kind of been in training now for the last few years. It's actually sitting on top of a rock. Beautiful fall color though. I mean, just goes to show you can turn almost any plant into bonsai. This is a crabapple volunteer plant growing in the crack of my pavers. So here in the Pacific Northwest, Douglas fir are volunteer plants. They grow everywhere. There's a couple more growing underneath the lace leaf. But yeah, I have a separate video on this bigger one that has been growing for the last, I don't know, 8 years or so. And I've been just pruning it in ground as if it was a bonsai tree. So this thing should be probably 10 feet tall, but it's not because I've been creating ramification by pruning it, and I'll probably turn it into a bonsai one day. And then lastly, here is a Thuja volunteer plant, a cedar, probably most likely a red cedar, that is growing on my trident tree. So we're gonna do something with the cedar, and I'll show you what you can do with some volunteers, especially this one. I've been wanting a nicely collected eastern white cedar, red, yellow, I don't care what it is. As long as it's a cedar with some nice chunky base and deadwood. And so I'm gonna make my own. So what is a tanuki? So a tanuki in bonsai, the sense of bonsai is that It is a method of making a younger tree look much, much older by applying it to driftwood or deadwood. So in the sense, it's kind of deceiving the viewer. And the reason why they call it Tanuki is because in Japan there is mythology that this raccoon-looking dog is a trickster and a master of shape-shifting and deceiving folks. And so that term Tanuki is applied to this technique in bonsai, where you're deceiving folks into thinking that this young tree is much older than it really is. Okay, here's the deadwood after putting on some lime sulfur, and I can see some spots that I've missed. So either that or they just haven't taken as well. I'm just gonna paint right over those spots one more time. Bleach this thing real nice and white. I actually should apply some wood hardener to this as well. That will help elongate the life of this deadwood. Okay, so this is a volunteer cedar. This is a red cedar, western red cedar that is, and it's the Thuja Plicata, and this is more commonly found here in the Pacific Northwest. Now, the other Thuja that you may have seen before are the eastern white cedars. These are found on the East Coast, and they grow in boggy areas. And if you don't know already, look up Michigan Yamadori. He has some wonderful, awesome Yamadori collected cedars that have been turned into bonsai, and he's really the inspiration for this video. So lucky for me, this deadwood had already a groove that was naturally built into the deadwood, and so I didn't have to use any power tools to carve a place for the cedar to go into. You may also have heard of either Alaskan cedar or yellow cedar or Alaska cypress or Alaskan yellow cedar. They're kind of in a different family. This is the Calotropis nucatensis. So they're not really categorized as a Thuja. And here you can see me using zip ties, and it's a temporary hold so I can keep the little sapling in place, right? I do have something on order to basically nail in the tree, but it's not coming for a couple days. So once I was happy with where all the zip ties were attached, just cut off the loose ends so that way keeps things looking a little bit cleaner. But I left a little bit of a nub on the zip tie so that way I can use the pliers and really just go in there and tighten everything up even more. I don't want any gaps because that is a very telling sign that one, it's a Tanuki, right? It's already fake. So you want it to look as if everything is one piece. It is also important to not pinch some of the fronds or needles on the cedar as you are attaching the zip ties, because one, it looks messy, and two, you're breaking potential branches, future branches that could be used in the design moving forward. Securing the tree into the pot is the other trick, and using a wire to tie in just the roots is not enough to hold it steady. So what I did was actually took a screw and screwed it into the deadwood, and so that way I could tie it to the deadwood and secure it that way. And even after doing that, actually, there was still a little bit of wiggle room, which I'm not too happy about, but I could adjust that in the future. And the way I set up my aggregates, I have them in separate containers, lava rock, turfus, pumice. I've got my shohin mix. I have my akadama in certain places, kanuma. And so it's like chipotle for me when I go and grab different soil types to mix. So it's like, yeah, I want some of that jalapeno over there and more cheese. Anyways, and so once I have that into a bin, I'll shake it up and mix it, and then use a sieve if I need to filter out some of the dust or fine stuff. Habitat of cedars are typically found in really moist, wet environments, and they do love being close to bodies of water. I've heard of stories of guys that would take cuttings and just stab it into a riverbank and come back a couple months later and it has roots. And so when I am preparing my, that way it can hold and retain water a little bit more than normal. Here I'm just showing off my little tiny sieve that I picked up from Daiso. I mean, this thing is, I think, $1.50 or less, and I love that store. I mean, it's like the 99-cent store, but way better. And so yeah, look how useful that is. I mean, that size means I could, instead of having to dump it back and forth from the larger sieve, I can just scoop out the soil from my little bin. All right, just a little bit of additional cleanup and have too many branches for now. I may cut it off in the future, but I'm leaving those ones there, so that way it has the energy throughout the next few years to, one, thicken up the trunk, and then, you know, hopefully it kind of melds in with that deadwood a little bit more once it thickens. And sometimes, you know, I've seen trees wrap around poles, wrap around rocks, wrap around bicycles that have been leaning on it for decades. And so the longer this thing grows, the more convincing it'll look, as if, you know, that deadwood and that live tree were one piece together. So as I was collecting moss, I found this little mushroom actually growing right next to it. Kind of interesting, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. Mushrooms grow in abundance in the fall time frame, and so that's another topic I want to cover in a different video. When you see mushrooms, you should spray your trees for fungicide, because not all mushrooms are good. All right, so I'm gonna have to ask you to put on your blinders and pretend that the zip ties aren't there. Now the branches and the fronds right now look a little bit messy, but it's only because I don't want to wire it. They're really tender, very young, and I don't want to break any branches right now. It's gonna need everything that it can get to recover from some of this work, because, you know, when you're bending branches, you're actually tearing cellulose tissue. It's kind of like going to the gym, doing bench presses. You're tearing muscle fibers, and then in turn, your body, by eating protein and having good nutrition, will then fill in that torn fiber with additional muscle. So it's growing. So I need to feed it well, make sure it's well taken care of so that it can recover from this work and then grow new cellulose. It's called stress wood, when a tree produces wood to counterbalance, you know, swaying or addition of like a branch that's growing heavy. And that's it. I hope you like it. Try it out. Super simple. Okay, so I couldn't help myself, and it putting a couple wires on this tree. You can kind of see how big it is when I hold it. It's a little hard to tell whenever you see it on camera. You don't see the person in the perspective of what the tree looks like. But this is it for now. I mean, it's a Tanuki using a volunteer cedar and free deadwood, cheap pot. I mean, probably 20 bucks, no more than that. Soil, maybe $5, if maybe $3, but I'm gonna estimate on the higher end, put a few wires in there, and that's nothing. I mean, I've had that laying around. And then, yeah, deadwood was free, and zip ties, $1 from the Dollar Tree, but it makes a convincing little bonsai. Now, over time, I will remove all of these zip ties, so you have to kind of use your imagination right now to see it without the zip ties. But that's part of the development of bonsai, is that you're not going to get a finished product right away. It takes time to develop. It takes years for it to fill in and then reach your image or your vision in the future. And so I'm pretty happy with this thing. It's passable. But anyways, so total cost of this thing was probably $26, and and 5 cents. Screw is where the 5 cents came from. But if you don't have a ton of money and you want to do a project like this is a Tanuki using volunteer plants. Try it out. Pretty fun.